Sarah had always been known for her gentle smile. People who met her once would often remember her because of the kindness in her eyes. She worked as a nurse in a busy city hospital, where the halls were always filled with the sound of rushing footsteps, crying children, and the beeping of machines. Every day was full of pressure, yet Sarah never let it show on her face. She believed that her patients deserved warmth even when she was tired, and she gave them that warmth without fail. But behind her smile was a story few people knew. Sarah came from a very humble background. Her father had passed away when she was still in school, and her mother's health was fragile. This meant that much of the responsibility for her family fell on her young shoulders. She had two younger siblings, both still in school, who looked up to her as more than just a sister. To them, she was a guide, a second parent, and their biggest supporter. Working long hours at the hospital was not easy, but Sarah had no choice. She needed the job, not just for herself but for her family. Her salary was modest, barely enough to cover rent, food, school expenses for her siblings, and medicine for her mother. By the time she paid for all of these, there was nothing left for her own needs. She never complained. To Sarah, taking care of her family was her duty, and she carried it out with quiet pride. Yet, sometimes, late at night when the world was quiet, she would allow herself a moment to dream. She dreamed of living a simple but fulfilled life, one where she did not have to count every coin before spending. She dreamed of buying a dress just because she liked it, not because she needed it for work. And sometimes, she dreamed of something even more tender, what it might feel like to be asked on a real date. Not the kind where someone casually invited her for coffee, but the kind where someone looked at her as if she was truly special, where she could feel like a young woman instead of just a provider and caretaker. But those dreams felt far away, almost like stories she read in books or saw in movies. In her real life, she had no time for such things. Most of her days were spent moving from one patient to another, checking their charts, adjusting IVs, and comforting frightened families. On her way home, she often stopped by the grocery store to pick up the cheapest items she could find. Sometimes she skipped meals so her siblings wouldn't have to. She wore the same few sets of clothes to work, washing them carefully each night, so no one would notice how worn they were. Despite all this, Sarah had a special gift: she never let hardship steal her kindness. Even when she was exhausted, she smiled at patients. Even when she was worried about bills at home, she took the time to hold a trembling child's hand during an injection. People often said she had the kind of presence that made pain a little easier to bear. And though she rarely received praise, she carried on because she believed that her work mattered. Her colleagues admired her dedication but often wondered why she never joined them after work. They sometimes went out for dinners or small gatherings, but Sarah always politely declined. She would say she had things to do at home, and that was the truth. Her evenings were spent cooking, helping her siblings with homework, and making sure her mother took her medicine. She never allowed herself the luxury of fun. Still, there was a quiet longing in her heart. Every time she saw a young woman in a beautiful dress passing by the hospital, she felt a small tug inside. She imagined what it would feel like to walk in such a dress, to sit across from someone who genuinely wanted to know her story, to feel like she was more than just a hard-working nurse or a struggling daughter. But then reality would return, reminding her that even the idea of buying a dress was out of reach. It was not that she was ashamed of her life, she was proud of what she managed with so little. Yet she wished, just once, she could experience the small joys that seemed so normal for others. Her family loved her deeply, but they were too young or too unwell to see the weight she carried. She never let them feel guilty. In fact, she often joked with them, lightening their moods, making them believe she was fine. When her siblings worried about her, she would laugh and say, "I'm stronger than you think." And perhaps she was. But being strong did not mean she had no secret wishes. The hospital became her second home. She was known to stay late, sometimes even taking extra shifts because it meant a little more money at the end of the month. She didn't care about herself much, but she cared about giving her siblings better opportunities than she ever had. Sometimes, while watching her patients recover, she thought about her own life. She wondered if she would always live this way, working, sacrificing, and dreaming silently. One cold winter morning, Sarah arrived at work earlier than usual. She wrapped her old coat tightly around herself as the chilly wind bit at her face. The hospital was already buzzing with activity, and she quickly slipped into her role. That day, she was assigned to a new case, a little boy who had just been admitted for surgery. She didn't know then that this assignment would quietly change the direction of her life. At first, it was just another day for her. She checked the boy's chart, spoke softly to him, and reassured his worried father that everything would be okay. She had done this countless times, calming anxious parents, offering them strength. She never thought that this father would see beyond her role as a nurse. For her, it was just duty, but for him, it became something more. Sarah had no idea that while she was quietly pushing aside her own dreams, life was preparing a surprise for her. She had always believed that kindness was her only gift to the world, but she was about to learn that sometimes kindness comes back in ways one can never expect. The little boy's name was Ethan. He was small for his age, with wide, curious eyes that seemed to take in everything around him. His father, Daniel, was a man in his late 30s, with a quiet, serious demeanor that softened whenever he looked at his son. From the moment Sarah met them, she could see the deep bond between father and child. Daniel was attentive, always asking questions about Ethan's care, always making sure his son felt safe and comfortable. Yet, there was a weariness in his eyes, a worry that only a parent can carry. Sarah approached her duties with her usual calm. She spoke softly to Ethan, explaining each procedure in a way that made him giggle rather than fear the hospital. She showed him how to hold a small toy to distract himself, and she even made up silly stories to make his time in the hospital less frightening. Ethan responded with laughter and trust, and Daniel began to notice something remarkable. Sarah had a way of making people feel at ease, a gift that went beyond her training or skill. Over the next few days, Sarah spent hours at Ethan's bedside, checking his vitals, adjusting his medication, and simply sitting with him when he was scared. Daniel watched her closely during these moments. He admired her patience, the way she always put Ethan's needs above her own, and the way she never let exhaustion show, even when the night before had been long and tiring. Sarah's dedication struck him deeply. One afternoon, Daniel found himself standing quietly at the foot of Ethan's bed, observing Sarah as she helped his son with a simple exercise. She smiled and laughed, encouraging Ethan with words that were gentle yet full of warmth. Daniel felt a pang of emotion he couldn't quite explain. He had met many nurses over the years, but none had made such a quiet, profound impact. There was something about her presence, something honest and pure, that made him want to know more about the woman behind the uniform. As the days passed, Daniel and Sarah began to exchange small conversations. At first, it was just polite questions about Ethan's care, updates about his recovery, or a shared concern about his comfort. But gradually, the conversations grew longer, warmer, more personal. Daniel learned that Sarah had a younger sister studying in high school, and a mother who struggled with health issues. He realized that she carried immense responsibility on her shoulders, yet she spoke of it with grace and even humor. Sarah, in turn, noticed that Daniel was not just a concerned father but a kind, thoughtful man. He had a gentle way of speaking, a calm patience that seemed to match her own. He was respectful, never intrusive, and he never treated her as just a nurse performing a job. There was a genuine curiosity in the way he asked about her life, a quiet admiration that was unmistakable. One day, while Sarah was helping Ethan with some light physical therapy, Daniel asked a question that made her pause. "Sarah," he said softly, have you ever had time for yourself? I mean, time to do something just for you, something that makes you happy. Sarah looked at him and smiled politely, trying to hide the pang of longing his question stirred. Not really, she admitted. I I have responsibilities. There's always someone who needs me more. Daniel listened, understanding in his eyes. He didn't respond immediately. Instead, he watched her for a moment, taking in the quiet strength in her voice, the gentle resilience in her demeanor. He realized that this was a woman who had spent her life giving to others, often without thought for her own happiness. There was something incredibly rare about that, a kind of selflessness that was becoming uncommon in the world. The conversation lingered in Daniel's mind long after. He found himself thinking about Sarah during breaks, wondering how someone so dedicated and kind could carry such a heavy burden. He admired her not only for her skill as a nurse but for her character, her integrity, and the quiet dignity she displayed every day. There was a softness to her strength, a humility that made her shine even brighter in his eyes. As Ethan's recovery progressed, Sarah continued to care for him diligently. Daniel began to visit more often, sometimes just to sit and watch her interact with his son. He observed the way she comforted children, how she spoke gently to frightened parents, and how her eyes lit up when she saw progress, no matter how small. It was impossible not to notice that Sarah's care went beyond duty, it was infused with genuine compassion. One rainy evening, Daniel stayed late at the hospital to speak with Sarah privately. The hospital was quiet, and the dim lighting made the room feel calm. "Sarah," he began, choosing his words carefully, "I know your life is not easy. I can see how much you give to others, but I wonder, do you ever allow yourself a little happiness?" Sarah looked down, feeling a mixture of shyness and surprise. No one had ever asked her that before. She shrugged softly. I I suppose I don't," she admitted. I have to take care of my family, my patients, there isn't really time for myself." Daniel nodded, sensing the truth in her words. "I can see that you carry a lot on your shoulders," he said gently. "And yet, somehow, you still manage to make everyone around you feel better. That is rare, Sarah. Truly rare." She felt a warmth at his words, an acknowledgement she had not expected. For a brief moment, she allowed herself to feel seen, not as a nurse, not as a daughter, but as a person. Over the next week, their conversations became more personal, filled with small laughs, shared stories, and subtle moments of connection. Sarah discovered that Daniel had a quiet sense of humor that often made her smile. He learned that beneath her gentle exterior was a strong woman who had faced life's challenges with courage and dignity. They began to develop a mutual respect and admiration that went beyond the hospital walls, though neither of them spoke about it directly. Ethan's recovery continued to improve, and Sarah found herself looking forward to seeing both father and son each day. She didn't realize it at first, but Daniel's presence began to make her days brighter. There was a comfort in knowing that someone genuinely cared about her as a person, not just as a nurse. It was a small thing, but it felt significant, like a gentle breeze breaking through a long winter. And then, one afternoon, as Ethan was preparing to be discharged, Daniel spoke quietly, almost hesitantly. "Sarah," he said, "I know your life is busy, and I know you've spent so much time giving to others. But I wonder if you would allow me to take you out sometime. Not as a favor, not because you need anything, but simply because I would like to know you better." Sarah blinked, caught off guard. She hadn't expected this. Her heart raced, a mix of surprise, excitement, and disbelief. She wanted to speak, to respond, but the words felt heavy and foreign in her mouth. For a moment, she couldn't imagine that someone could see her, not just her work, not just her sacrifices, but her as a person worthy of attention and care. She nodded slowly, a small, shy smile forming. I don't know what to say," she whispered. Daniel smiled softly, sensing her hesitation. "You don't have to say anything now," he said. "Just think about it." That evening, as Sarah returned home, she felt a strange warmth inside her chest. She thought about Daniel, about his kindness, his quiet respect, and his genuine interest in her life. She realized that, for the first time in a long while, someone had asked about her happiness, not just her responsibilities. She felt hope stirring in her heart, a hope that perhaps life had more to offer than endless sacrifice. For the first time, she allowed herself to imagine what it would feel like to experience a simple joy, like being asked out on a date, like having someone see her for who she truly was. The thought made her heart flutter with a mix of excitement and fear, but it also made her feel alive in a way she hadn't felt in years. That night, as she lay in bed, she reflected on the unexpected connection she had formed with Daniel and Ethan. She realized that life had a way of surprising people, sometimes in the smallest of ways, sometimes when they least expected it. And while she still had challenges to face, she felt a spark of something new, something that could change her world, slowly but surely. Sarah closed her eyes and whispered a quiet prayer of gratitude. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew that something had begun, a connection that had the potential to bring joy, hope, and perhaps even love into her life. For the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to dream not of material wealth, not of luxury, but of the possibility that kindness and courage could be recognized and returned in ways that touched the heart. After Ethan left the hospital, Sarah returned to her usual routine, but things felt different now. The days seemed longer, the nights quieter, and yet, there was a strange lightness in her heart she hadn't felt in years. She thought often about Daniel's words, about the way he had looked at her with genuine interest, and about the possibility of something new entering her life. But reality always returned quickly, reminding her of her responsibilities. Life had no pauses, and the weight she carried did not lessen overnight. Sarah's mornings began as always, with hurried showers, a quick breakfast, and a packed lunch she rarely ate. She would make sure her siblings were ready for school, check that her mother had taken her medicine, and then rush to the hospital. Every step felt automatic, a rhythm she had followed for years. Yet, her mind often wandered to Daniel's gentle smile, his calm voice, and the unexpected way he had made her feel seen. At the hospital, Sarah threw herself into her work. She had other patients to care for: an elderly man recovering from a broken leg, a young woman who had suffered an accident, and several children who needed attention. Each patient demanded her time and focus, and yet, despite her exhaustion, she found herself smiling more, laughing softly at small things, and noticing tiny details she might have ignored before. The hospital, which had once felt like an endless cycle of duty, now felt a little warmer, a little more alive. But her personal struggles remained. The bills at home were piling up, and her salary could barely cover the essentials. Some nights, she would sit at the small kitchen table, tallying the month's expenses, and realize there was barely enough left for groceries. Her siblings' school fees were due soon, and her mother's medicines were becoming more expensive. She knew that any small indulgence, even something as simple as a new dress, was out of reach. The thought made her heart ache, but she pushed it aside, as she always did. Despite the pressure, Sarah began noticing moments that made life feel lighter. Sometimes, it was a thank you note from a patient's family, or a smile from a child who felt better because of her care. But mostly, it was the memory of Daniel's presence, the way he had spoken to her without judgment or expectation. It was a feeling she could not name, but it lingered, quietly nudging her heart. One evening, after a particularly long shift, Sarah walked home under the dim streetlights. The city was calm, and the air was crisp. She thought about Daniel and wondered if he was thinking about her too. She shook her head, chiding herself. Life had taught her to be practical. People like Daniel, successful and attentive, were usually far removed from someone like her. She was just a nurse working hard to support her family. Yet, a tiny part of her dared to hope, dared to imagine that maybe, just maybe, life could surprise her. At home, her siblings greeted her with hugs and chatter about their day. Her mother smiled weakly, grateful for Sarah's presence, and Sarah felt a warmth in her heart. She prepared dinner, helped with homework, and tucked her siblings into bed. By the time she sat down to rest, exhaustion weighed heavily on her, but her thoughts drifted once again to Daniel. She wondered if he truly understood her life, the quiet struggles she endured every day, and yet, somehow, she felt that he did. The following week, Daniel returned to the hospital to check on Ethan. Sarah's heart raced when she saw him in the hallway. His presence brought a mixture of nervous excitement and comfort. He greeted her politely, as always, and they exchanged a few words about Ethan's progress. It was brief, but each interaction left a lasting impression on her. She realized that she was beginning to look forward to seeing him, to hearing his calm voice, and to feeling a connection she had longed for but never expected to find. Even as she felt this growing connection, Sarah faced practical challenges. Her worn uniforms were fraying, her shoes were scuffed, and she had little money to replace anything. She wanted to look presentable, not just for Daniel, but for herself, to feel a little confidence in a world that often seemed harsh and unforgiving. Yet, she could not justify spending money on herself when her family needed it more. Every coin she had was accounted for, every decision weighed against the needs of those she loved. Despite the hardships, Sarah did not complain. She had learned long ago that life demanded resilience and strength. She continued her work with dedication, often staying late to ensure her patients were cared for. She helped new nurses adjust to the hospital environment, offering guidance and support. Her colleagues admired her not only for her skill but for her unwavering commitment. Yet, few knew the private longing she carried in her heart, the quiet desire to experience something simple and joyful for herself. One afternoon, while preparing Ethan's room for discharge, Daniel approached her again. He smiled gently, noticing the tired lines on her face. "You've done so much for Ethan," he said. "And for everyone here. I hope you realize how special you are, Sarah." She felt a lump in her throat, touched by the sincerity in his voice. "I'm just doing my job," she whispered. But Daniel shook his head, his expression firm yet kind. "No," he said. "It's more than that. You give more than anyone could expect, and yet you do it without asking for anything in return. That is rare." His words stayed with her long after he left. Sarah thought about them as she walked home, as she prepared dinner, as she helped her siblings with their studies. They were not just words of praise, they were a recognition of her struggles, her sacrifices, and her quiet strength. For the first time, she felt that someone truly saw her, not just as a caregiver, but as a person with her own dreams and desires. Days passed, and Sarah continued to navigate the delicate balance between work, family, and personal longing. She faced exhaustion, financial stress, and the constant demands of her job, yet something had shifted within her. The memory of Daniel's attention, his kindness, and his understanding acted as a gentle reminder that life could hold surprises. She found herself smiling more often, laughing at small moments, and feeling a subtle but persistent hope. One evening, while tucking her siblings into bed, she allowed herself a quiet moment of reflection. She realized that her life, though filled with challenges, was not devoid of beauty. The love of her family, the trust of her patients, and the unexpected connection with Daniel were all reminders that even in struggle, moments of grace existed. She felt a stirring of courage, the courage to allow herself to hope, even if just a little, for something that had once seemed impossible. Sarah's life was still demanding, but she began to see that it was also full of opportunities. Small gestures of kindness, moments of genuine connection, and the acknowledgement of her worth slowly chipped away at the weight she carried. She realized that while she could not change her circumstances overnight, she could embrace the possibility of joy, however fleeting it might seem. And so, she continued her days with determination, balancing her responsibilities with a newfound sense of anticipation. Each shift at the hospital, each interaction with patients and families, was now tinged with the quiet hope that life could offer something more. She did not yet know what the future held, but she allowed herself to dream of simple pleasures like being seen, appreciated, and perhaps, one day, experiencing the small joy of a genuine connection with someone who cared for her as much as she cared for others. The day Ethan was finally ready to leave the hospital, Sarah felt a mixture of relief and sadness. She had grown attached to the little boy and his father over the past weeks, and the thought of saying goodbye brought an unexpected ache to her heart. Ethan had made remarkable progress, and it was clear that Sarah's care had played a big part in his recovery. She had guided him patiently through every exercise, soothed his fears during difficult moments, and celebrated every small success with him. Daniel arrived earlier than expected that morning, a small smile on his face that betrayed his excitement. He had packed Ethan's belongings and was ready to take him home, but he lingered, clearly wanting to say more than just a brief farewell. Sarah walked into the room, her uniform crisp but slightly wrinkled from the long shift, her hair tied back in its usual practical bun. She smiled at Ethan, checking that he had everything he needed, then glanced at Daniel. Daniel cleared his throat and said softly, "Sarah, I just wanted to thank you again. For everything. You didn't just care for Ethan, you made all of this easier for me too. I don't know how I could have gotten through this without you." Sarah felt her cheeks flush. She was used to gratitude from patients' families, but there was something in Daniel's tone, something deep and sincere, that made her pause. She shook her head, laughing softly. "I was just doing my job," she said, trying to brush off the compliment. But Daniel shook his head, his eyes locking onto hers. "No, Sarah. It's more than that. You care in a way that cannot be taught. You care with your heart. And it's remarkable." For a moment, they stood in silence, the beeping of machines in the background fading into quiet. Sarah's heart raced, and she realized that for the first time in a long while, she felt truly seen, not just as a nurse or a caregiver, but as a person. She wanted to speak, to express the feelings stirring inside her, but the right words seemed to elude her. Daniel took a small step closer, his voice gentle but deliberate. "Sarah. I know this might sound sudden, but I've been thinking about you since the day I first met you. You've shown so much kindness, patience, and strength. And I would like to know you better. Would you allow me the honor of taking you out on a proper date?" Sarah's heart skipped a beat. She blinked, caught completely off guard. The words felt like a dream she had never dared to imagine. She wanted to speak, to say something intelligent or witty, but all she could manage was a soft, I don't know what to say." Daniel smiled warmly, sensing her hesitation. "You don't have to say anything now," he said. "I just wanted you to know how I feel. No pressure, no expectations, just a simple invitation. If you feel comfortable, I'd love to take you out sometime." For a long moment, Sarah simply looked at him, her mind spinning. She had spent years working, sacrificing, and putting others first. She had never imagined that someone like Daniel, someone who had noticed her not just for her work but for who she truly was, would ask her out. The thought brought tears to her eyes, not tears of sadness, but of overwhelming emotion. She nodded slowly, a small, shy smile forming on her lips. I I would like that," she whispered finally. Daniel's face lit up with a gentle, triumphant smile. "Thank you, Sarah. That means more to me than you know." Even as she agreed, a new worry surfaced. She thought about what she would wear, about how she would look. She had no fancy dresses, no evening outfits. Her life had never allowed for such luxuries. The thought made her heart sink slightly. She felt embarrassed, wishing she could somehow look the way she imagined someone would expect her to. Daniel seemed to notice her hesitation. "Sarah," he said gently, "don't worry about that. I want you to be comfortable. I want you to be yourself. And if it helps, I can help you pick something out. Not because you need it, but because you deserve it." Sarah felt a warmth spread through her chest at his words. There was no judgment, no pity, only a sincere desire to see her happy. She nodded, feeling a mix of excitement and nervousness. The idea of having someone care about her happiness in such a thoughtful way was both overwhelming and comforting. The following days were filled with anticipation. Sarah continued her shifts at the hospital, but now there was a new lightness in her step, a small flutter of excitement whenever she thought about the upcoming date. She couldn't help but imagine the evening, what she might say, how she might feel, and the possibility of truly enjoying herself for the first time in years. Daniel stayed in touch during the week, sending polite messages to ask about her day and to see how she and her family were doing. Each message brought a small thrill, a reminder that someone was thinking of her with genuine care. Sarah felt a renewed sense of hope, a feeling she hadn't allowed herself to experience in a long time. Finally, the day arrived. Daniel suggested they meet at a small restaurant known for its cozy atmosphere. He wanted it to feel relaxed, a place where conversation could flow naturally, and where Sarah could feel at ease. She spent the morning nervously preparing, carefully selecting her outfit with the limited options she had. Daniel had arranged for a modest but beautiful dress to be delivered to her, a gift to help her feel confident and special. She felt a mixture of gratitude and embarrassment, but mostly, a quiet excitement. When she arrived at the restaurant, Daniel was already there, waiting with his usual calm smile. The sight of him brought a rush of nervous energy and a warm sense of reassurance. They greeted each other politely, and for a moment, Sarah felt the tension of her daily life melt away. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to simply enjoy the moment, to be present, and to experience the joy of being seen and appreciated. The evening unfolded gently. They talked about ordinary things, books they enjoyed, childhood memories, and small details about their daily lives. Sarah laughed more than she had in months, feeling a lightness in her chest she had almost forgotten existed. Daniel listened attentively, asking thoughtful questions and offering insights without ever making her feel judged. The conversation flowed naturally, a quiet dance of understanding and curiosity. At one point, Daniel complimented her dress, not on its price or appearance, but on how it suited her personality. "It's beautiful, not because of what it is, but because of the person wearing it," he said softly. Sarah felt her cheeks warm, touched by his sincerity. She realized that he truly saw her, not as someone needing charity or pity, but as someone worthy of admiration and care. Throughout the evening, Sarah felt a sense of freedom she had never experienced. She could laugh, share her thoughts, and simply be herself without worrying about bills, responsibilities, or expectations. Daniel's presence was comforting, grounding, and yet exciting, as though he had opened a door to a world she had long imagined but never dared to enter. By the end of the night, Sarah felt a mixture of gratitude, joy, and wonder. She realized that this simple act, being asked on a date, being treated with genuine kindness, had given her a renewed sense of hope. She returned home that night with a light heart, feeling as if a small but significant chapter of her life had begun. And though she still faced challenges, responsibilities, and the daily struggles of her life, Sarah now carried within her a quiet but powerful certainty, that kindness and understanding could change lives, that she could be seen for who she truly was, and that sometimes, the simplest gestures of care could open doors to the most profound happiness. The days that followed Sarah's first date with Daniel were filled with a quiet joy she had never known before. Life did not suddenly become easy, her responsibilities remained, her financial struggles continued, and the long hours at the hospital were just as demanding. Yet, there was a new lightness in her heart, a warmth that came from knowing that someone truly cared for her, not just for what she did, but for who she was. Daniel continued to be a part of her life, slowly, gently, respecting the boundaries she had always maintained. He never rushed her, never made her feel obligated, and never allowed the weight of her challenges to become a burden on their budding connection. Instead, he offered support, encouragement, and understanding, showing her that relationships could be built on kindness, patience, and mutual respect. Sarah found herself looking forward to the small moments they shared, the quiet phone calls after her shifts, the gentle messages checking on her family, and the rare moments when Daniel would visit without any reason other than to see her. She began to realize that it was not grand gestures that mattered most, but the consistent, thoughtful presence of someone who genuinely valued her. At home, life continued in its usual rhythm. She helped her siblings with schoolwork, tended to her mother, and managed the household with the efficiency and care she always had. Yet, something had shifted within her. She felt stronger, more confident, and more open to experiencing joy, even in the midst of life's challenges. Daniel's presence had reminded her that she deserved happiness and that small, unexpected moments could make life richer. One evening, after finishing a particularly long shift at the hospital, Sarah returned home to find a small package waiting at the door. It was from Daniel. Curious, she opened it to find a handwritten note and a delicate locket inside. The note read simply, "For you, to remind you that you are seen, valued, and appreciated. You carry so much with grace, and you deserve to be celebrated." Sarah felt tears welling in her eyes. The locket was not expensive or extravagant, but it was filled with thought, care, and a message that touched her deeply. For the first time, she allowed herself to fully acknowledge her feelings. She realized that the long years of struggle, of giving more than she received, and of silently hoping for joy, had led her to this moment. Daniel had not just asked her on a date, he had seen her heart, recognized her worth, and treated her with a respect that she had always hoped for but rarely encountered. As their relationship grew, Sarah began to notice small changes in herself. She laughed more freely, allowed herself moments of rest, and even started imagining a future that included not just her responsibilities, but also her happiness. She realized that caring for others did not mean she had to neglect herself. In fact, allowing herself to experience joy made her even more capable of giving to those she loved. Daniel, for his part, continued to be patient and understanding. He never pressured Sarah or tried to change her life. Instead, he offered encouragement and gentle support, whether it was helping with errands, celebrating small victories, or simply listening when she needed to talk. He treated her as an equal, someone whose feelings and dreams mattered just as much as those of anyone else. This approach deepened Sarah's trust and affection for him, creating a foundation of mutual respect and genuine care. One weekend, Daniel suggested a small outing, a picnic in a nearby park, just the two of them. Sarah was nervous at first, worrying about how she would look, whether she had the right clothes, or whether she could enjoy herself without distraction. But Daniel reassured her, emphasizing that it was about the experience, not appearances. They spent the afternoon walking through the park, sharing stories, and enjoying the simple pleasure of each other's company. For Sarah, it felt like a world away from the demands and pressures of her daily life, a world where she could simply be herself. Through these experiences, Sarah began to understand a profound truth: happiness was not always found in grand moments or material wealth, but in the small acts of kindness, attention, and genuine connection. Daniel had taught her that being valued and seen could transform ordinary days into something extraordinary. She began to carry this lesson with her into every part of her life, approaching her patients with renewed warmth and finding joy in moments she had once overlooked. As time went on, their relationship continued to blossom. They learned about each other's dreams, fears, and aspirations. Sarah shared stories of her childhood, her family, and the sacrifices she had made to care for them. Daniel listened attentively, never judging, always offering support and understanding. He shared his own experiences, his values, and his hopes for the future, allowing Sarah to see the depth of his character. Their bond grew not through dramatic gestures or instant passion, but through quiet, consistent acts of care, trust, and mutual respect. Each shared laugh, each thoughtful conversation, and each small act of kindness strengthened the connection between them. Sarah felt a sense of security she had never known, a knowledge that someone was walking beside her, not to take over her life, but to share it with her. The story of Sarah and Daniel also began to touch those around them. Her siblings noticed a change in her demeanor. They saw her smile more, relax more, and even dream about possibilities beyond the immediate struggles of daily life. Her mother noticed a light in her eyes that had been absent for years. And her colleagues at the hospital observed a renewed energy in Sarah, a warmth that seemed to radiate from her even in the busiest of shifts. Looking back, Sarah realized that the journey she had taken from exhaustion and financial hardship to a place of hope, connection, and newfound happiness was not sudden or easy. It was built through resilience, patience, and the small, meaningful actions of someone who recognized her worth. Daniel had not just asked her on a date, he had opened the door to a world where she could be both strong and vulnerable, responsible and joyful. In quiet moments, Sarah reflected on her life and the lessons she had learned. She understood that giving to others was noble, but it did not have to come at the expense of her own happiness. She recognized that kindness could inspire kindness, that seeing someone's worth could change their life, and that even the smallest gestures like a thoughtful note, a gentle smile, or a simple invitation could create ripples of hope and joy. The first date had been just the beginning. Over time, Sarah and Daniel shared many more experiences, each one deepening their bond and reinforcing the lessons they had already learned. They faced challenges, as all couples do, but the foundation of trust, respect, and genuine care allowed them to navigate life's obstacles together. Sarah felt grateful every day for the kindness that had entered her life at a time when she least expected it, and for the opportunity to finally experience the joy she had longed for. Eventually, Sarah realized that the love she had found was not just about romance. It was about being seen, valued, and supported in a way that honored her strength and her heart. She understood that true connection could transform ordinary lives into something extraordinary, that hope could emerge even in the most challenging circumstances, and that life had a way of rewarding patience, courage, and selflessness. Sarah's story became an inspiration, a quiet reminder to those who knew her that even in hardship, life could offer moments of beauty, kindness, and unexpected joy. She continued to work at the hospital, care for her family, and navigate her daily responsibilities with grace. But now, she did so with a sense of hope, confidence, and the knowledge that happiness, love, and recognition were possible even for someone who had spent years putting others first. Looking back, Sarah knew that she had come a long way from the girl who worried about affording a simple dress. She had learned that true happiness was not measured by material possessions, but by the depth of human connection, the kindness of others, and the courage to allow herself to hope. The young nurse who once carried the weight of the world on her shoulders had discovered that life could be richer, fuller, and more joyful than she had ever imagined, and that sometimes, the simplest gestures could create the most profound changes. And so, Sarah's journey continued, filled with care, love, and the quiet, enduring joy of knowing that she was seen, appreciated, and valued not just for what she did, but for who she truly was.